Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So the chapter that we read was called White Farm Imaginary, How One Farmer's Market Refetishizes the Production of Food and Limits Food Politics.
It's chapter 12.
And so its core thesis for this chapter, or for her chapter, it's Lady Christy McCullum. In this chapter, I investigate the representation of food growers at a farmer's market in California and what that image says about the racial politics of food production, consumption, and activism in the United States. Each of us are going to take a piece of it. Sean's taking food production, Arness is taking consumption, and then I'm ending it off with activism. Before we jump into the main brunt of the presentation, just to kind of define some terms that'll probably come up. Just sustainability, it's a concept that emphasizes change that not only ensures wise use of natural resources, but also equitable distribution of environmental risk and benefits.
The next term is fetishize, which is a term used to describe when something is becoming the focus of the process, which connects to the next term, which is commodity fetishism, which is the originating term, which turns into fetishizing. A commodity fetishism originated from Karl Marx when he described how capitalism makes it so that the worker is separated from the product, and the focus is placed on the product instead of on how it's made, which is essentially what something is when it's fetishized. Defetishization is, of course, the reverse of this, which is placing it back on the worker instead of just the product itself. Do you want to talk about the last one?
The alternative agri-food movement, it's a counterculture movement whose main priority is just sustainability and asserts that positive social and environmental outcomes will result from fostering direct relationships between the producers and the consumers. The farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, CSA, are two leading alternative agri-food institutions and they attempt to foster these relationships through direct marketing. A strategy wherein producers sell directly to consumers without the mediation of supermarket middlemen.
Okay, so for production of food in regards to the white farm and farmers markets, there's a term originating mostly from Thomas Jefferson called agrarianism, which is the idea that an ideal American citizen is sort of like the white agrarian farmer who grows his own food and sells it. And because of this idea, most Americans have like an idea of their brain of like the white farmer. And as we studied before, this is sort of more or less a tool used by major food corporations to sort of get this image in our heads when it's very much not the reality, which is part of why people go to farmers markets, which is what Arness will talk about when we get to consumption. But people have an idea that at farmers markets they're buying from these white farmers who are selling it to you. So they believe that the vendor that they're buying it from is the person who also grows it, while this is most likely not the case. And in the farmers market that the author goes to predominantly and interviews people at, she notices that about 54% of vendors there at the farmers market were white, which is a very high number compared to the amount of people who grow food in these farms who are white, while the race of people who grow these foods is mostly Hispanic, in fact.
All right, now on to consumption. There are a few forms of consumption: normal consumption, consumption of knowledge, and emotional consumption, and I'll get into those in a second. The consumption is really based around the agri-food movement, which is where like the vendors or the farmers markets, their main place is to increase the vendor and consumer relationship, which is the biggest form for consumption. During her studies, she studied she studied the Davis Farmers Market in California, which is a California certified farmers market. Now, what makes this farmers market different from others is that with the CCF certification, it makes it so only farmers can sell their products at that farmers market. So there are various reasons for consumption. Some of them lead from sympathy and pity. The basic common assumptions that all farmers sell their produce at the farmers market. The community culture, more of a home-based culture, as different from a normal supermarket. To give back directly to the producer or the grower at the market, and to gain knowledge of their produce. Something that actually today is pretty big. A lot of people not knowing where their food comes from. Now, breaking down that, it has a lot to do surrounded around the defetishization of the farmers market, which is bringing the consumers and the growers closer together. Now, talking about normal consumption, on page 218, there's a quote really striving big off of direct marketing. When he speaks on the farmers markets aim to teach through consumption. As customers buy food, they can will meet and socialize with the grower and learn about more of the farm, the produce, how the weather reacts to their the produce and the crops that they're getting, which also helps and adds into the knowledge. The emotional consumption is surrounded heavily around pity too. The sympathy and pity. A lot of the farmer or the customers that she interviewed while her time either working as a vendor during at some of these farmers markets, or simply walking through and interviewing people and various farmers, is that a lot of them do that, or a lot of them purposely buy from the buyers because they feel that they want to help the farmers because they know how hard their lives are, and how it actually ties them better. It makes them emotionally attached with the consumption of the produce. On page 230, there is a direct quote where a young lady actually speaks on saying where, well, I guess I always just feel better after going there. So it's like emotionally. It's like it feeds me both emotionally and with food. So like her relationship and going to the farmers markets brings her closer to the food and her. Now with the common assumptions of that all farmers markets, the farmers sell the produce there. That's a common misconception, and that's based more on what Chris will talk about in a few minutes. That because you go to a farmer's market, it's different from a grocery store, which would be put under the fetishized department. Supermarkets, where they conceal the levels of production to the final product. The farmer's market, like I said earlier, they work to go against that. So the common assumption when they get there, most people are at farmers markets. During one of McCullen's studies in California, she actually noticed that some of the people were weirded out because of the CCF statement that would actually some farmers decided to put on like their cars and their trucks saying a certified California farmer. And one of the quotes on page 225, another young lady states, what does that mean? Of course they're a farmer. We're at a farmer's market. They automatically assume that the farmer, or that the vendor that's selling the produce is the farmer that's actually picking the produce, when in reality, 80% of the produce that's picked and cultivated is actually by Latino Americans. And that's where you get to pretty much where Christian probably take over talking about the activism.
Yeah. So toward the latter portion of the chapter, McCullen kind of launches into more of an activist type voice, where she kind of says that the alternative agri-food movement is making some steps in the progress of achieving just sustainability, but there's a lot to work on. In her words directly, the white farm imaginary that I described above is akin to the supermarket pastoral in that it illustrates the dissonance between the real and imagined landscapes of sustainable agricultural production. Farmers markets act as agents of perpetuating white and American cultural myths and narratives about agriculture in the United States. Their efforts to defetishize the production of food are only partial. They reveal the production methods of food and introduce customers to farm owners, but still hide the contribution and exploitation of Latino labor on page 231. So essentially she's saying farmers markets are doing an okay job putting customers in the position to learn about how what they are buying is being produced as opposed to relying on major corporations and their marketing for answers. But the shroud still exists even there. The farm owners are the only ones who interact with the customers, and as discussed in the production portion of this presentation and as conveyed by McCullum, they are predominantly white, thereby whitewashing politics in the realm of the food industry and keeping larger social justice issues out of the eye of the public. A portion of this chapter that I particularly enjoyed was the way in which she tried to attack cognitive dissonance. She didn't try to attack it with a very logical or eloquent way. She just actually barrages the reader with a certain number of questions that make you think. The first one being, how would the alternative agri-food movement's discourse and prescribed actions be different if customers saw Latino farm workers behind the stands or knew that they were the people who grew their food? Another one of her big questions was, would farm workers be heroes of the movement too? Would customers still be as compassionate to these people? Would the interactions between customers and vendors be as friendly? Would customers' energy be directed at peddling through the rain to buy directly from the grower? Or would that energy also be used to rally for immigration policy that allows for permanent residency for farm workers? Would customers demand different agricultural labor policy that defended minimum wage instead of sanctioning non-living wages for farm workers? Would the movement challenge the notion of private property laws that create class distinctions between farm owners and farm workers? And there's even more questions than this. And what she's trying to do is she's trying to counteract the cognitive dissonance that's present, not only in the people that she speaks to, as far as the customers who are shrouded by the white, kind of like the white veil that kind of conceals the Latino workers who actually pick the fruit and the vegetables. She's launching an attack on our own cognitive dissonance, and our own stereotypes of what we may see as a farm, where we see, or we grew up with the song "Oh McDonald" and we envisioned a white guy, when nowadays, for the most part, it's a Latino guy or maybe an African American guy, as told in this chapter, who's picking your fruits and vegetables and maybe even helping with domestic livestock. But toward the end, she does make careful notice to say that I do not claim to know the answer to these questions, but I am curious how broader the political project of the movement would be if the glorified subjects were more than the farm owner and the paying customer. I believe that it is possible that the presence of Latino farm workers at farmers markets would acknowledge their role in growing sustainable food and also draw attention to the trade policies that have both encouraged Mexican campesino migration and forced small farmers out of traditional markets in the U.S. So what I got from this essentially is that this is not just a food issue. It's an equality issue, it's a humanitarian issue. And once we solve this, once we can achieve just sustainability in this realm, we can achieve equality in other realms of issues in the United States of America. She pays notice to one particular successful initiative, but for the most part, she's been very pessimistic. Like she said, and she probably believes other people won't be able to answer these questions anytime soon. But the one initiative that did work out was called the Fair Trade Certification, which demands improved labor standards, suggests that plenty of people want to ensure safe and fair labor conditions for workers. It's something that is already in policy and is demanding equality for the workers and also kind of trying to achieve that just sustainability that the agri-food movement is trying to achieve.
So is it defined by working because it's in place or because it's effective?
No, it's actually a policy that was passed.
So, but is that why she defines it as working because it's in place, or is that?
Yeah, because it's like it's a political initiative that is actually pushed for the sake of the work. That's what the majority of this is. It is about kind of unveiling the shroud that's with farms and how reality is being virtualized in a way. But this is one of the few initiatives that's in the realm of Latino equality as far as workers go. That's what she's really doing. So does anybody else have any?
So, why don't other states have like a certified farmer's market?
Yeah.
Or is it there like a lack of interest, or is it something more institutionalized?
She doesn't speak to that in this chapter.
A lot of it would probably have to do just simply with geography, and like certain states just don't have, because like a lot of these people, the farmers markets that she goes to are in California, which has a lot of like diverse landscape and places you can grow fruits and vegetables anyway, and also a large workforce there, because that's where a lot of Latino immigrants go to.
Even in New York, it's pretty big too, like the immigration or migrant workers are heavily used in New York actually. So like I think it has to do a lot too with like it being hidden, which is what we pretty much covered talking about, like how like even though they're trying to fix the problem, they haven't really done so.
I think it's more so institutionalized. I think that if legislation was increased in this realm, a lot of people who've been making big bank off of taking advantage of people would not be any. I read recently that in the District of Columbia, the minimum wage went up to $11.15, which is unheard of. You can actually live on that wage. And because that also has an effect on the Gallatin area, I'm pretty sure a lot of the supervisors and upper management in that area are losing a lot of money, and they're probably not used to it, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be some backlash. So if there was universal assent to the type of legislation like this, it would definitely ruffle up some corporate big heads, and they would not be happy with it. So they're going to, of course, perpetuate institutions